When I was 12 years old, my father died unexpectedly. My parents were already divorced, and my father lived in a nearby town. He died, and it was devastating to me. And that summer, my aunt and uncle and two female cousins invited me to come stay with them for a couple of weeks. And they lived in a small farming town in the middle of Kansas. It was cornfields and wheat fields everywhere you looked. It's one of the most cherished memories I have because it was the first time in my life as a child that I got to experience what it feels like to be nestled in a functional family where there's a father and a mother and kids. And in this case, the mother was a homemaker and took care of the kids, and my uncle would go to work every day. And it almost looks like a TV show to me when I think back on it. Just how safe and nurturing that nuclear family was to me. And it happened one day that I was hanging out with my cousins, and they were both a few years older than me. And we were talking about what we wanted to do with our lives. And one of my cousins said that she wanted to be a mom when she grew up. And she had almost like a little bit of embarrassment when she said that. Because even though this was the early 80s, we'd all gotten the message that, women's lib is what it was called back then. We'd all gotten the message that there was something wrong with traditional women's roles, with being a mother and a homemaker. Somehow that wasn't good enough. Somehow that was oppressive. We'd all gotten that message, and especially me, because I grew up with a single mom who was a feminist, and she taught me those ideas. And so when my cousin told me that she wanted to be a homemaker and a mother when she grew up, I criticized her. I still feel ashamed of this to this day, but I shamed her. I don't remember my exact words, but I basically told her that there was something wrong with her for wanting to do that. And there I was at 12 years old, so full of confidence that I knew what was right and wrong for women, that I knew what was right and wrong for my cousin, and what women should do and shouldn't do, and what was best for women. I thought I knew that at 12 years old. Looking back, I can see it was just arrogance and ignorance, but that's what I'd been taught. In this video, I want to discuss a sensitive question. And that question is, are there beliefs in modern feminism that are hurting women rather than helping them? And I want it to be really clear right up front that this video is not me doing what I did when I was 12 and trying to tell women what they should or shouldn't be doing. This post is not against women's rights or against women's empowerment. In fact, it's the complete opposite. What I'm going to do in this video is criticize some ideas that have made their way into the feminist movement that I think are actually disempowering and hurting women. And I might be wrong, and I'm open to being wrong. And if you disagree with me, I would love to hear about it. Tell me, and I will listen. I may not agree, but I will listen and I will give it serious thought. I actually consider myself to be a true feminist in the sense that I want women to have equal power to men in society. I want men and women to work together, to complement each other's differences, to support each other in thriving. I love women. Some of my most amazing spiritual teachers and healers and personal growth teachers, starting when I was 15 years old, have been women. I have literally bowed my forehead to the ground in front of a few female teachers. A woman not only gave me birth, but there have been several women that saved my life. They gave me something so precious that I think it probably saved my life. So I feel gratitude towards women and love and goodwill. In fact, you can watch one of my other videos where I remembered being a woman in a past life. So The last thing I'm trying to do here is disempower women or denigrate them or put them down. I just want to talk about some ideas that are part of modern feminism to see if they're true or not. Because in my worldview, when I love somebody, I tell them the truth. I have this deep, deep faith in truth. I believe that we cannot be happy without truth. We cannot be empowered without truth. And so I think there are some ideas in modern feminism that are untrue. And I see those ideas hurting women. They're also hurting men. They're hurting children. But I think most of all, they're hurting women. And there's nothing more compassionate and loving that I could do than to try to shine a light on some of those ideas. So as you may already guess from my story about my cousin, one of the main ideas that I think is false in modern feminism is the idea that there's something wrong with traditional women's roles. I just don't think that's true. If a woman feels called to be a mother and a homemaker, who are we to say that there's anything wrong with that? I think it's wrong to pressure and compel women into traditional women's roles, to punish them if they try to step outside of those roles. That's clearly hurtful and wrong. But if a woman wants to be a mother and a homemaker, that's an incredibly powerful and important role in our society. Just like I experienced with my aunt and uncle and cousins. And along with that falsehood, there's another one that's maybe even worse. And that is the idea that women haven't always had power and privilege in our society. Is that really true? You know, I just watched an interview with an Amish woman. She was incredible to watch because she'd grown up in a strict sect of Amish religion in Pennsylvania on a farm. There was almost no electricity or technology. She worked all day long along with her family on the farm. There were incredibly strict rules about socializing and what she could wear and couldn't wear for the men also. And eventually she decided to run away. As a young adult, she wanted to experience more than what she was able to experience in that community. So she ran away, but she remained Amish and she remained grateful for her upbringing. And she was asked a question in this interview: why are women in Amish communities treated like second-class citizens? And her answer was very, very interesting because remember, she'd run away from the Amish community. She wasn't living there anymore and hadn't been for many years. She loved her life outside of the community. So she wasn't still within the mindset of that upbringing. She was outside of that. But when she answered this question, why are women treated like second-class citizens in Amish community, there was a genuine puzzled look on her face. She said, I don't believe women are treated like second-class citizens there. Men and women in that community have roles to play, and they both play those roles. They both have a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of limits placed on what people are allowed to do, both men and women. But she didn't see women being treated lesser than. She did point out that the leaders of the community were all men. There was a council of men that led the community, and yet she still didn't see, even being an outsider now, she didn't see women being treated as second-class citizens. And I think that's really interesting. She was also asked in a follow-up question, does she think people in Amish community that she grew up in were happy? And she said something, again, extremely interesting. She said that now that she's lived in both worlds, her very strict community versus modern Western society, she said she has to say that the people in the Amish community were happier, even though they worked really hard and they didn't have technology and they didn't really take vacations. She said that there was a peace about them, a connectedness about them. especially as they got older and older. When you hang out with them, she said, there was like a light in their eyes. There was a presence to them that was so peaceful and sweet. They were happy. This throws a wrench in the gears of our modern thought around gender roles and around what makes us happy. The truth is, I don't think Americans are happier than most people now in the world. I think we're driving ourselves crazy, to be honest with you. And one of the ways that we're driving ourselves crazy is this belief that women not only never had power or privilege, but that they still don't have any, and that they have to fight to get it, fight against men, subjugate, emasculate men, and steal some of that power away from them so they can claim it for themselves and take over the world. To anyone who thinks women don't have privilege in our society, they obviously haven't had to sign up for the draft right as a war is starting in the Middle East, like I had to do. A war that I didn't believe in. When I turned 18, I had to sign up for, I think it's called selective services, just as every male in America has to do still. I had to sign up for that, and they were talking about instituting the draft for this war in Iraq that I absolutely didn't believe in. I thought it was oil companies telling our government to go over there and take over so that we could control the oil, so that these oil barons, these oligarchs, could further protect and enhance their wealth at the expense of American citizens forced to go over and kill other people and be killed for an unjust war. It's a terrifying feeling, guys. If you've never had to feel that, I'm happy for you. Women still don't have to sign up for the draft to this day. If you don't consider that a privilege, something is missing from your understanding. Another sign of privilege, it's so simple, but historically women didn't have to open doors for themselves if there was a guy standing there. Some women now get insulted by that. Another one, historically women didn't have to carry their own luggage. You know, when I was a teenager, I was on tour with an Indian guru and an entourage of about 100 people, about half of which were women. Do you know how much luggage I carried for these women? It never occurred to them that they would carry their own luggage. That, you know, this was in the 80s. That's what guys are for. Carrying 3 large suitcases up 3 flights of stairs. This is back before the airlines constricted what you were allowed to bring to a little tiny bag. This is back when you could still bring a bunch of big heavy suitcases, big ones. You know how many of those I carried upstairs? And no one ever thanked me, and it never occurred to me that I should be thanked. That's a privilege. And these are like really simple examples, but they're not isolated. They're part of a culture, part of a societal belief system and behavior that we were all taught back in the day. And yes, part of that was oppressive and limiting to women, especially if a woman didn't want to go along with it. But there were a lot of privileges there. You know, we hear a lot about the unequal numbers of women in STEM fields, science, technology. But we never hear about the unequal numbers of women in garbage pickup. Have you ever seen a female garbage man? I never have. Not one time in 56 years have I ever seen a single female garbage woman. And I sometimes think we'll know that we have equal rights for everybody when I see 50% of garbage men are women. And it's not just picking up garbage, it's the dirtiest and most dangerous jobs in our society are dominated by men. And we rarely hear anyone complaining about that. But that's a privilege. That's a perk. What have we lost as we gained this modern feminist belief system? Did we throw some babies out with the bathwater? Are there some teachings in this modern philosophy that don't really empower women, but actually make life harder for women. Do you know that in polls, they find that the demographic that is the least happy, who self-report themselves being the least happy out of all male, female, conservative, or liberal, it's liberal women who report being the least happy in our society. These are the same women most likely to adhere to this modern feminist belief system. And again, it's not the feminism of equal. It's the feminism of men are holding us down and making us miserable. We've got to fight them and push them down so we can rise up. That's the feminism that I'm talking about, that I'm criticizing. I'm not criticizing equal, complementary, support each other, help each other thrive. Recently, I looked up the term toxic femininity on Google, and I looked up the term toxic masculinity on Google because I wanted to compare them. And I noticed a couple of really big differences. One of them was that the term toxic masculinity was way more common than the term toxic femininity. This wasn't a surprise to me because I don't know if that I've ever really heard the term spoken about in public, toxic femininity. I've heard about toxic masculinity. I believe in toxic masculinity. I believe that's a real thing. And I believe it needs to be called out. And I believe men need to address it and work on themselves. So I'm not against women calling out toxic masculinity. I think that's important. I think when we love someone, when we love society, when we love ourselves, we're going to call out stuff that's hurting us and hurting other people. And there is such thing as toxic masculinity that's hurting us. And it needs to be looked at and it needs to be healed. But I can't remember ever hearing anyone talking about the term toxic femininity. Does that mean it doesn't exist? Well, Google tells me it does. It's just not as popular to talk about. But the more disturbing thing I noticed about these two search results is something that I call the two psychologies model of looking at gender. We have a psychology specific to women and we have a psychology specific to men. Because if you read the search results, you'll hear Google saying that toxic femininity is bad behavior by women as the result of women being hurt and oppressed by others. But when you read toxic masculinity, you see them defining it as bad behavior by men that's just the result of men being bad, is basically what they're saying. It's inherent to men. It's not the result of men being trained from boyhood to desensitize to their own tender emotions. It's not the result of boys and men being the target of violence at a vastly higher rate than women. I mean, violence or the threat of violence is something every guy knows about. Walking the halls in middle school and high school, that was a constant feeling for me that one of these bigger guys could start something with me because who knows why? Someone insulted him. He needs to punch down because he's feeling bad about himself. Or I looked at him the wrong way or whatever. And in my 20s and 30s, going into clubs, going out to festivals, seeing other guys my age, there was always this sizing up thing. Always these vibes. Me being super sensitive to vibes, body language, subtle. I mean, it's not really subtle to me. It's apparently subtle to a lot of people, but to me, it's loud. That violent energy is something that I had to live with for decades as a guy. And it's only when I got gray and wrinkly that I started noticing these younger guys weren't sizing me up and kind of posturing up in subtle ways and kind of, I wasn't a threat anymore. Thank God. What a relief to not be a threat. In fact, I'm getting to the age of putting out grandpa vibes to people, and I think I'm going to start getting treated even nicer. and I'm going to take it. I love it. Treat me nicely, guys. Why weren't we doing this when I was, starting as a teenager? I get it that women aren't happy, a lot of you. I get it that you don't feel safe, even though you probably are safer than most women on the planet and most women throughout all of history. But keep in mind, men aren't safe either. As I said earlier, we are the victims of violent crime at a vastly higher rate than women. Yes, we also commit violent crime at a higher rate, but we're the victims of it too. Men don't show their fear. That's one of the emotions that got stamped out of us as children. We're not supposed to show that, but we are afraid. Underneath our bravado, our macho vibe, that facade of confidence, that numbing of our feelings, we're afraid. Of course we are. Is it really true that there was no power and privilege in traditional women's roles, like being a mother and a homemaker? I think it was an incredibly powerful position. The problem is in trying to pigeonhole and force women into that when that's not really what their nature wants. It's not really what their character is about. That's oppression, and that has to be gotten rid of. And it has been gotten rid of to a vast degree. I don't know the actual numbers, but I've heard it said that the low numbers of women in STEM fields is because of the low interest from women in STEM fields. They're not as attracted to those dry intellectual fields as much as men are, so they don't pursue it as much. That might be the reason for the low numbers today. In the past, there was heavy bias and bigotry keeping women out, and they had to really work hard to establish themselves in those fields. Is that still true? Has anything changed in our society? It's been illegal to pay women less than men for at least as long as I've been alive. It's been illegal. And I don't know of any woman who has been paid less for a particular role. I've never heard of that happening to anyone that I've ever known. It's been illegal to discriminate against women. And the culture has radically changed. If anything, when I worked in an office, I saw men tippy-toeing around the women, and I saw the women having more social freedom. Who was going to make a dirty joke in one of our meetings? Was it a guy? Heck no. He doesn't want to get called out by HR for sexual harassment. The only people who felt safe enough to make crude sexual jokes were the women. There was not an equal power there. The women had more power in that sense. I mostly saw men tippy-toeing around women. But then I also hear women complaining that men aren't strong anymore. What's going on there? I've heard from the spiritual teacher who I adore, Byron Katie. She says that a lot of the men she talks to feel like they can't do anything right by women, that no matter what they do, it's wrong. And I've experienced that. Women have been trained to look at life that way, especially in America. And I think it is decimating our relationships. A lot of men are giving up on relationships with especially American women. And it's creating a crisis of loneliness and disconnection for women, especially those women who got that chip on their shoulder, who would never say, I'm sorry, or I was wrong in a relationship, because that's disempowerment. That's humiliation. That's a man trying to control me. That's me being subjugated. No, not necessarily. You can't have a loving, healthy relationship where both people aren't able to say, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Unless you're perfect, of course. You might be perfect. You might be one of those perfect people who never are wrong and never make any mistake and never accidentally hurt someone's feelings, never have a bad day. But if you're not one of those magical people, then of course you've got to be able to say, honey, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Whether you're a guy or a girl, we all have to be able to take accountability and say, I'm sorry, and so on. But that understanding has been pushed out of the female culture in America, and it's not only destroying the traditional family that is so powerful and nurturing to children, but it's making us terribly, terribly lonely. And what I'm seeing is that the more lonely and unhappy women get because they've bought into this lie, the more they blame men for how unhappy they are, to the point where the disconnection from reality, from like demographic data, from polls, from statistics of what women really experience in America and what they think they're experiencing in America, there's been a growing ravine between those two things. The reality of how safe and privileged and empowered they are versus what's going on in their belief system. So this video hopefully causes some questioning to arise, to take a second look. I know that this will trigger some people. It's always uncomfortable to question beliefs, especially when the belief is around survival, mistreatment, empowerment, justice, all that stuff. But just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not important to look at it. I say all of this with the greatest love and respect and goodwill for women.